My husband, Arthur, had been resting in the quiet earth of Oak Ridge Cemetery for exactly 8 months when his phone rang from the bottom of his locked wardrobe. I was standing in our bedroom on a cold Friday afternoon, holding a cardboard box filled with his old woolen cardigans, deciding which ones to donate to the church down the road. The house was dead quiet, smelling faintly of his cedar-shaved pipe tobacco and lavender laundry soap. Then, from behind the solid oak doors Arthur had built with his own hands 35 years ago, came a sharp, rhythmic buzz. My breath caught in my chest. I dropped the cardigan I was folding. Arthur was 74 when his heart failed while clearing dry leaves from the garden drainage ditch. I had personally handed his silver phone to our son David 2 days after the funeral so David could call the carrier, disconnect the line, and download photos of the grandchildren. I had watched David clear the memory. I had seen that device lying black and dead on the kitchen island before David slipped it into his coat pocket. Yet the wardrobe was vibrating. I walked toward the heavy wooden doors, my knees trembling beneath my dark wool skirt. The brass handle wouldn't turn. It was locked. Arthur had always kept that key on his personal brass ring, which now sat in a small blue dish on top of my dresser. I retrieved the key with numb fingers and inserted it into the keyhole. It turned with a dry, heavy click. I pulled the left door open. Inside, suspended between two of his heavy tweed winter coats, hung a small velvet bag I had never seen in 52 years of marriage. It was hooked over a brass screw driven directly into the back panel. Through the thin black fabric, a small screen was glowing, humming steadily against the dark cedar. I reached out, loosened the drawstring, and pulled the device into the light. It was not Arthur's sleek silver phone. It was an older, cheap, prepaid flip phone, black and slightly scuffed around the edges. On the small glowing display, a single line of text flashed in stark white block letters. Martha, if you are reading this, do not tell David. Go to First National Bank before 3 o'clock today. Ask for safe deposit box 412. The caller ID didn't show a 10-digit number. It displayed a single name in capital letters. Bros, Bros, Brews, Brews, Brew. My name is Martha Vance. I am 71 years old, a retired middle school English teacher, and for more than half a century, I was Arthur Vance's wife. We lived a measured, quiet life in a small town 2 hours west of Chicago. We built our home brick by brick, paid off our mortgage, tended a modest tomato garden, and raised our son David. Arthur was a civil engineer for the County Road Commission, a broad-shouldered, quiet man who measured every board twice, spoke only when he had something precise to say, and kept his promises. Or so I had believed. Our son David, now 45, lived 15 minutes away on the north side of town with his wife Sarah and our 2 teenage granddaughters. David ran an independent auto repair shop and stopped by my house every single evening at 6 o'clock to check the furnace, drop off the mail, and make sure I was managing alone. We were an ordinary family. We had no sudden wealth, no public scandals, no dark shadows hanging over our holiday dinners. I stared down at the cheap black phone. The screen timed out and went dark, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the glass. A woman with short gray hair, heavy lines etched around her mouth, and eyes wide with cold dread. Why would Arthur hide a second phone in a velvet bag behind his winter coats? How could a text message arrive from his contact name 8 months after we buried him? And why was I being instructed to hide this from our son? My first instinct was to call David. Ever since Arthur died, David had handled my tax papers, checked the oil tank, and taken over the winter yard work. But the instruction on the tiny screen had been sharp and absolute. Do not tell David. The long case clock in the hallway chimed 1:30. First National Bank, where Arthur and I had kept our joint checking account since 1974, closed its vault counter at 3 o'clock on Fridays. I put on my navy coat, tucked the strange little phone deep into my purse, locked the heavy front door behind me, and walked out to my blue Buick sedan. The drive across town felt completely surreal. The familiar oak trees lining our neighborhood, the brick post office, the hardware store where Arthur bought his brass screws. Everything looked identical to yesterday, yet every familiar landmark felt subtly, horribly wrong. When I stepped into the carpeted lobby of First National Bank, the warm heat hit my face. Richard Henderson, the branch manager who had handled our auto loans 30 years ago, looked up from his glass-walled office and stepped out to greet me. "Good afternoon, Martha," he said gently, his tone carrying that soft deference people reserved for recent widows. "It's good to see you out. How are you managing with the house?" "I'm managing, Richard. Thank you," I said, keeping my purse clamped tightly against my ribs. "I need to open our safe deposit box today." Richard smiled politely. "Of course. Let me grab the master key. It's box 108, correct? The one you and Arthur renewed back in 2018? Box 108 was where we kept our house deed, our passports, and our marriage certificate." "No, Richard, not 108. I need access to safe deposit box 412. Richard stopped mid-step. He looked at me for a long moment, the warmth fading from his eyes, replaced by sharp professional confusion. "Box 412? Martha, are you certain?" "Yes," I lied, forcing my voice to remain level. "Arthur left a note among his personal papers asking me to check 412. Richard rubbed the back of his neck and gestured toward his private office. "Step in here for a moment, Martha, please." I followed him into the small office. He closed the heavy wooden door, walked behind his desk, and opened a thick leather-bound vault register. He flipped through several pages before stopping near the middle, running his index finger down a column of dates from the mid-90s. "Martha," Richard said softly, looking up over his glasses, "Box 412 isn't a joint account. It never was. It was opened 30 years ago, in October of 1994, under Arthur's name alone." "I am his wife, Richard," I said, my knuckles turning white against my handbag. "I am the executor of his estate. I have his death certificate, his probated will." "I know that, Martha," Richard interrupted gently, holding up a hand. "And for Box 108, those documents give you full authority, but Box 412 has a completely separate contract. Arthur set it up with specific access conditions. Under the original lease, access was strictly restricted to Arthur or to a secondary authorized cosigner he added to the account back in the spring of 1996. A cold sweat broke out along my hairline. "Who is the cosigner?" Richard hesitated, glancing down at the yellowed signature card. "I shouldn't be showing you internal vault records without a formal request from the estate attorney, Martha. But given how long our families have known each other, I will tell you this much. The cosigner isn't a family member. The secondary authorized name on Box 412 is Clara Montgomery." The name hit me like a physical slap. In 52 years of shared life, through quiet dinners, summer vacations, church socials, and long evenings reading by the fireplace, Arthur had never once uttered the name Clara Montgomery. "Who is she, Richard?" I whispered. "I don't know, Martha," Richard said honestly. "I wasn't the branch manager in 1996, but under bank rules, a single owner's death does not automatically transfer a private box to a surviving spouse if a living cosigner remains on the signature card, unless you have the box's second key and a signed surrender form, or a direct court order from the probate judge. I cannot legally take you into the vault for 412. "A second key?" I repeated. "Safe deposit boxes require 2 keys to open," Richard explained. "The bank's master key, which stays in my safe, and the customer key. Arthur had 1 key. Clara Montgomery was issued the second key when her name was added to the lease in 1996. Arthur had maintained a secret financial account for 3 decades. He had tied it to a woman I had never heard of, and he had deliberately kept my name off the paperwork." "I see," I managed to say. "Thank you for explaining, Richard. Please don't mention this to David just yet. I want to check Arthur's desk at home first." Richard looked at me with deep concern. "Martha, If David is handling the estate logistics, it might be simpler to let him. No, I said, sharper than I intended. I will handle it. I hurried out to the parking lot, sat in the driver's seat of my Buick, and locked the doors. I pulled the cheap black flip phone out of my purse. Almost instantly, the device vibrated against my fingers. A new text message appeared on the screen. He turned you away because you don't have the key. Look inside the glove box of your Buick, under the plastic tray. My breath hitched. I looked around the parking lot. A few cars were parked near the street, but no one was watching me. How did the message know I was in the Buick? How did it know Richard had turned me away? My trembling fingers reached across the passenger seat and pressed the latch on the glove box. The plastic door fell open, spilling out tire pressure gauges, old paper maps, and a box of spare light bulbs. I reached inside, lifted the black plastic organizer tray that lined the bottom, and felt around in the dark corner. Taped flat against the metal floor of the dashboard was a small brass key stamped with a 3-digit number, Buff 4442. Arthur hadn't left a message from beyond the grave. He had built a mechanical, highly detailed plan before he died. He had hidden this key in my car. He had hidden the phone in his wardrobe. He had known I would find the phone, read the text, go to the bank, be refused by Richard Henderson, and then come back out to this car. Every move I was making had been predicted months ago by my quiet, deliberate husband. I sat in the idling sedan, the brass key burning cold against my palm. If I went back into the bank, Richard would still demand the secondary cosigner or legal paperwork. And why had Arthur explicitly ordered me not to tell David, unless the secret was something Arthur was hiding from David, or unless David was somehow connected to the lie? My thoughts were shattered by the loud ringing of my primary mobile phone sitting in the cup holder. The screen lit up with David's contact photo. I froze, taking a slow, deep breath before pressing the green button. Hello, David. Hey, Mom. David's deep, familiar voice filled the car, accompanied by the metallic rattle of impact wrenches from his auto shop. Just checking in. Are you still working on Dad's clothes? Oh, yes, dear, I lied. Just taking my time. That's good. Don't overdo it, David said smoothly. Then, after a subtle pause, his tone shifted. By the way, Mom, I swung by the house around 12:30 to bring you some lunch from the deli, but your car wasn't in the driveway. Are you out running errands? A spike of ice shot down my spine. He had been at the house at 12:30, 30 minutes after I found the phone. I needed to pick up some tea at the grocery store, I said, forcing steady breath into my lungs. And I stopped by the pharmacy. Ah, I see, David said. His voice was casual, but there was a sharp, searching quality beneath it. Well, keep the doors locked when you get back. I'll be over at 6 as usual to make us some soup. Thank you, David. I'll see you at 6. I hung up and checked my reflection in the sun visor mirror. My face was pale. David checking on me was normal, but his question about my car felt less like filial concern and more like a guard checking an enclosure. I looked down at the brass key in my palm. I couldn't go back to the bank without knowing who Clara Montgomery was. I put the Buick into drive and headed toward the public library 4 blocks away. The town library was a quiet red brick building, smelling of old paper and floor wax. I walked straight to the local history annex in the basement and pulled down the heavy blue city directory for 1994, the year safe deposit box 412 was originally opened. My finger traced down the columns of names. There were only 4 Montgomery entries in the entire county in 1994. The 4th entry read, Montgomery, Clara, Fort Hubbard 12 Maple Street, Apt 3B. Occupation, Assistant County Clerk. Arthur had worked for the County Road Commission for 32 years. His office had been on the 2nd floor of the county courthouse. Clara Montgomery hadn't been a distant stranger from another town. She had worked in the exact same building. I put the directory back and pulled the microform reels for the local newspaper. the County Gazette, covering the spring and summer of 1996, the year Clara's name had been added to the bank box. I loaded the film into the viewing machine. The hum of the cooling fan filled the dark basement as I scanned through months of local birth notices and property transfers. After 40 minutes of searching, I stopped at the July 18, 1996 edition. A small headline near the bottom of page 3 caught my eye. County employee killed in single vehicle crash on Route 9. I zoomed in on the text. Clara M. Montgomery, 34, of Maple Street, was tragically killed late Tuesday evening when her vehicle left the roadway on Route 9 during a heavy rainstorm. Ms. Montgomery, who served as an assistant clerk in the county land records office for 6 years, is survived by her infant daughter, Rachel, born earlier this spring. Authorities noted that road conditions and standing water contributed to the crash. Clara Montgomery had died in July 1996. A terrible knot of confusion and anger formed in my chest. If Clara Montgomery died in July 1996, how could she have been listed as the living secondary cosigner on Safe Deposit Box 412? Richard Henderson had told me her name was added in 1996, but if she was dead, she couldn't have walked into First National Bank to sign a lease card after July of that year, unless the box hadn't been created to share something with Clara while she was alive, unless Arthur had set up the box after her death to hold something left behind for her infant daughter, Rachel. I searched the rest of the page for any mention of the child's father. There was none. No husband was listed. Clara Montgomery had died alone on a wet county road, leaving a newborn baby behind. And 3 months after her death, my husband, a quiet, respectable civil engineer with a wife and a 12-year-old son at home, had walked into First National Bank, taken out a private safe deposit box, and tied it permanently to Clara Montgomery's memory. Had Arthur been having an affair with a clerk in his building? Was the baby, Rachel, Arthur's secret daughter? Had I spent 50 years sharing a bed with a man who was quietly funding another woman's child behind my back? Every sweet memory from the summer of 1996, our family trip to the lake, David's Little League games, Arthur helping me paint the kitchen, was instantly tainted. While I was making dinner for our family, Arthur had been carrying the weight of a dead woman and a hidden child. The cheap black phone in my purse vibrated sharply against my hip. I pulled it out with trembling fingers. The screen lit up with a new text. You know who Clara was now, but you do not know the full truth. Go to Arthur's workshop behind the garage. Look inside the hollow leg of his drafting table. The second key is not there. The truth is, the texts weren't reacting to my thoughts in real time. They were following a logical progression. Arthur knew that if I found out about Box 412, I would inevitably search for Clara's name. He knew where that search would lead. He was driving me down a track he had laid years ago. I left the library and drove straight home. The house stood quiet under the overcast sky. I walked past the main house and went straight to the detached wooden workshop Arthur had built behind the garage. A red-painted building that smelled permanently of pine sawdust, varnish, and motor oil. I unlocked the heavy padlock on the door and stepped inside. In the back corner stood his civil engineering drafting table, a heavy, antique oak desk with thick square legs. I knelt on the cold concrete floor beside the rear left leg. Near the bottom, where the wood met the floor, there was a subtle seam in the oak. I pressed my fingers against it. The wood gave way with a soft click, revealing a hidden sliding compartment carved directly into the timber. Inside the hollow space lay 2 items, a thick manila envelope and a small leather-bound notebook. I sat on Arthur's wooden stool and opened the manila envelope. Inside was a legal document from 1997, a court petition for private guardianship. The petitioner was an elderly woman named Evelyn Montgomery, Clara's aunt from a neighboring county. The document established that following Clara's death in 1996, legal custody of the infant, Rachel Montgomery, had been awarded to Evelyn. Attached to the petition was a private financial agreement signed by Arthur Vance. Under its terms, Arthur bound himself to pay a monthly stipend of $600 directly to Evelyn Montgomery for the care, education, and medical needs of Rachel until her 21st birthday. I opened the leather-bound notebook. Page after page listed 30 years of meticulous record-keeping in Arthur's precise handwriting. Dates, check numbers, bank wire transfers, tuition payments for a private high school, and college tuition records for Rachel Montgomery at the University of Illinois. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money drawn quietly from Arthur's personal consulting fees. Money he had earned doing private surveying work on weekends, kept entirely separate from our joint family accounts. Tucked into the back cover of the notebook was a photograph from 2018. It showed Arthur standing in a sunlit university courtyard beside a young woman in a graduation cap and gown. She had dark hair, clear hazel eyes, and a sharp, intelligent smile. Arthur was holding a bouquet of flowers, looking down at her with deep, quiet pride. Arthur had missed David's business school graduation in 2018, claiming he had an urgent county road inspection 2 counties over. He had lied to me. He had stood in that courtyard with another woman's daughter, or his own, while I sat at home making dinner alone. An overwhelming mixture of grief, betrayal, and white-hot anger washed over me. Arthur had presented himself to the world as a stoic, devoted husband, yet for 30 years he had operated an entire shadow family economy, channeling time, emotion, and massive sums of money into a girl whose existence he had hidden from his wife. Was she his daughter? Had he loved Clara? Had his entire marriage to me been nothing more than a comfortable routine? I turned the page of the notebook. Loose between the last 2 sheets was a folded piece of yellow legal paper written in Arthur's handwriting, dated 6 months before his death. Martha, if you are reading this, my heart has finally failed, and the phone in my wardrobe has fulfilled its purpose. I know the rage and heartbreak you must feel looking at these records. You have every right to curse my memory. You have every right to feel betrayed. I need to tell you the truth about Clara Montgomery, though I know it cannot undo 30 years of silence. Clara was not my lover. Rachel is not my daughter. In the spring of 1994, Clara came to my office at the county building. She was terrified. She was pregnant by a man named Gregory Vance, my younger brother. Gregory had abandoned her the moment she told him about the baby, fleeing the state to escape unpaid debts and criminal charges. Clara had no money, no family in town, and nowhere to go. Gregory was a hollow, dangerous man, Martha. You knew what he was before he disappeared from our lives. Clara was desperate. She begged me not to let Gregory find out about the child, fearing he would return to take the baby or harm them both. I promised her I would help. I promised her I would make sure the child was cared for. When Clara died on Route 9 in 1996, that promise became my life's heaviest burden. I couldn't tell you, Martha. I was a coward. I knew that if I told you my brother had left a child, if I brought the scandal and the financial strain into our home, it would fracture our peace. You had suffered 2 miscarriages before we had David. The thought of bringing Gregory's abandoned child into our lives felt like a wound I didn't know how to navigate. So I made a choice, a selfish, arrogant choice. I decided to bear the secret alone. I funded Rachel's life through my private surveying work. I made sure she had a home with her grandaunt Evelyn. Over the years, as Rachel grew, I became a mentor to her, a distant uncle she knew only as the man who kept his word to her mother. But I lied to you every single day to keep that world separate from ours. Box 412 holds the original trust deed I established for Rachel using my private funds, alongside the final legal documents regarding Gregory's total forfeiture of parental rights. Rachel holds the second key to the box, given to her by her aunt when she turned 21. I could not bring myself to confess this to you while I lived, Martha. I was terrified of seeing the trust leave your eyes. But David found out 5 years ago. He found my private ledger in this shop, and that is why I am writing this to you now. Punks wand. I reread the last sentence, my mind racing. David found out 5 years ago. The strange phone call from David this afternoon. His subtle questions about my car. His sudden appearance at the house at 12:30. Everything snapped into a terrifying new context. David hadn't been checking on a grieving widow. David had been tracking me. Before I could process the thought, the heavy wooden door of the workshop creaked open. A shadow fell across the concrete floor. David stood in the doorway, framed against the gray afternoon sky. He was wearing his heavy work jacket, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. His face was devoid of its usual warm smile. His jaw was set, his eyes cold and fixed intently on the manila envelope in my hand. "You found the drafting table," David said softly. His voice carried no warmth, only a flat, dangerous calm. I stood up slowly from the stool, pulling the envelope against my chest. "David, what is this?" David stepped inside the workshop, pushing the heavy door closed behind him. The room grew significantly dimmer. "I saw your car at the library, Mom. I watched you pull out of First National Bank 2 hours ago. I knew the moment you went to Henderson's office that Dad's little surprise had finally gone off." My heart pounded violently. "You knew about Box 4112? "I've known about Box 4112 for 5 years, Mom," David said, his voice dropping into a bitter register. "I found Dad's private ledger right where you're standing. I confronted him. I asked him how he could work extra hours, sell off equipment, and funnel hundreds of thousands of dollars out of our family's estate into some girl's pocket. 'She is your cousin, David,' I said, my voice shaking with fear and sorrow. 'She is Gregory's daughter.' 'I don't care who she is,' David snapped, his voice echoing sharply off the rafters. 'She's nothing to us. Dad spent 30 years taking money that belonged to our family, money that should have gone toward my shop, toward my daughter's college funds, and handed it to a stranger.' When I confronted him, do you know what he told me? He told me it wasn't my money. He told me he would disinherit me from his private estate if I ever tried to touch that trust. 'So you waited until he died,' I whispered. 'I had to,' David said, taking another step closer. 'Dad was stubborn, but when he died, I searched his office for the second key to Box 41-2. I couldn't find it, because the girl has it. Rachel has the second key.' David reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a heavy brass key ring, Arthur's master ring, from the dresser, alongside a folded sheet of legal paper. 'Rachel came to town 2 days ago, Mom,' David said, his eyes locking onto mine. 'She reached out to me. She wants to open the box, claim the trust deed, and settle Dad's remaining private accounts. She thinks I'm helping her organize Dad's final paperwork. She's coming to First National Bank on Monday morning.' 'What are you doing, David?' I asked, backing away until my shoulders hit the sturdy frame of Arthur's workbench. 'I'm fixing what Dad broke,' David said smoothly, pulling a pen from his pocket. 'The bank box holds a trust deed that hasn't been fully registered under Rachel's name yet. If you sign an affidavit as the estate executor declaring that Arthur's private accounts were funded using joint marital assets, we can void the trust in probate court. The money comes back to you, Mom, to us, where it belongs.' 'No,' I said clearly. David paused, his brow furrowing. 'What did you say?' 'I said no, David,' I repeated, my voice finding a steady, cold strength. 'Your father was wrong to keep this secret. He broke my heart today, but he gave his word to a dying woman. And he spent 30 years taking care of a child who had nobody else. I will not sign a document to strip away what he built for her.' David's face contorted into pure, bitter rage. He took 3 fast steps across the workshop, grabbing my arm with a grip so tight his fingers dug deep into my skin. 'You don't understand, Mom. I am drowning. My shop is losing money. Sarah and I are behind on our mortgage. Dad had hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in private bonds, and he gave it away to Gregory's bastard. You are going to sign these papers.' 'Let go of her, David,' a firm, quiet voice echoed through the workshop. David froze, and turned his head slowly toward the doorway. Standing in the open doorway was a young woman in a beige rain trench coat. She had dark hair, clear hazel eyes, and a sharp line set across her mouth. In her right hand, she held a small black device, the matching transmitter to the cheap flip phone in my purse. Beside her stood Richard Henderson, the manager from First National Bank. "Get your hands off Mrs. Vance, David," Richard said firmly. Right now, David stared at them in shock, his grip on my arm loosening until his hand dropped to his side. "Richard? What are you doing here?" "Rachel called me 2 hours ago, David," Richard said, stepping into the workshop. "She told me you had been pressuring her to surrender her key to box 41-2. She told me you threatened to contest her mother's estate if she didn't meet you at the bank on your terms. And when she noticed Arthur's secondary phone signal activated this afternoon, she realized you were tracking your mother." Rachel stepped past Richard into the dim light of the shop. She looked at David with deep disgust, then turned her eyes toward me. Her gaze was hesitant, filled with anxiety and profound respect. "Mrs. Vance," Rachel said softly, "I'm sorry. I didn't want to intrude into your home. But Arthur made me promise if the phone system ever activated, I was to make sure you were safe from David." David backed away toward the workbench, his face pale. "You brought the bank manager to my house. I haven't done anything illegal." "You attempted to coerce an estate executor, David," Richard said coldly, "and Rachel has recorded every text message and phone call you sent her over the last 48 hours, threatening to tie her up in court unless she signed over the trust. If you take another step toward your mother, I will call the county sheriff myself." David looked at Richard, then at Rachel, and finally at me. He looked smaller suddenly, a desperate, greedy man whose long-brewed resentments had finally collapsed around him. He didn't say another word. He turned on his heel, pushed past Richard, and hurried out into the afternoon air. We heard his truck engine start up in the driveway, tires spitting gravel as he sped away. The workshop grew silent again. I stood leaning against Arthur's drafting table, my chest heaving, my mind spinning. Rachel stepped closer, keeping a respectful distance. She pulled a small brass key from her coat pocket, identical to the key sitting in my hand, and laid it gently on the wooden desk beside Arthur's ledger. "He loved you very much, Mrs. Vance," Rachel said softly, her eyes brimming with tears. "Every time I met Arthur, he spoke about you. He told me you were the finest woman he had ever known. He hated himself for keeping this from you, but he was terrified that the truth would break your family apart." I looked down at the two brass keys lying side by side on the dark oak wood. I didn't feel an instant wave of warmth or maternal comfort. I didn't open my arms to embrace this young woman. The betrayal was too fresh, the anger at Arthur too raw, the heartbreak over David's greed too deep. Arthur had kept a secret for 30 years, and while his intentions toward Rachel may have sprung from a sense of duty, his silence had left a trail of fractured trust that could never be fully repaired. I looked at Rachel. She wasn't my daughter. She was a stranger connected to my husband by a dead woman's tragedy and a 30-year debt. But looking into her hazel eyes, I saw no malice in her, only the quiet dignity of a young woman who had grown up under the shadow of a hidden life. "He broke my heart, Rachel," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "He lied to me for half my life. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive him for that." Rachel nodded slowly. "I understand, Mrs. Vance. You don't owe him forgiveness, and you don't owe me anything." I took a deep breath, reaching out with a trembling hand to pick up Arthur's key, then reached further and picked up Rachel's key as well. "Monday morning," I said softly, looking at her. "We will go to First National Bank together. We will open box 412. We will settle Arthur's trust for you, exactly as he promised your mother." Rachel looked at me, a tentative, deeply grateful smile touching her lips. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance." "And after that," I added, looking out the dusty window toward the cold gray sky, "you and I will sit down and have a cup of tea. And you can tell me who Arthur was when he wasn't at home with me. The sun was setting low over Oak Ridge Cemetery when I finally stepped back into my quiet house. The rooms were still dark, smelling faintly of cedar and pipe tobacco. Arthur was gone, leaving behind a legacy that was neither purely heroic nor entirely unforgivable. Just the complicated, flawed choices of a man who tried to manage a tragedy in secret. But as I locked the front door behind me, I knew that for the first time in 50 years, I was stepping into the truth.